Hi everyone, so glad that you could join us today. During this webinar, we will focus on and dig into one of the features that was released very recently with the December 2017 release. The feature that we will talk about is external sharing. So I will go through all of the major steps for setting it up, how to use it, and I will point out some important tips on the feature. Before we begin, I'd like to do a quick introduction. My name is Alyssa and I'm on the product team of Bracket Labs, and I will be leading this webinar. And Jamie, our VP of Marketing, is also here to assist me today. We're really excited to share all the tips and tricks behind the external sharing features so that you can start using it in your orgs. A little bit more on how you can connect with us if you ever need to. You can always reach out to us by email, support@bracketlabs.com, or go to our support site, which is support.taskray.com. We are on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn as well. And we have a Trailblazer community group as well as the group on the Power of Us Hub. We're always happy to hear from you, so please reach out to us if you have any questions, suggestions, or if you have any ideas. We love getting your feedback, so please share it with us on ideas.taskray.com. All right, so let's dive in. This webinar will cover a lot of details, but we do have all the documentation about this feature on our support site, and it will cover all of the same information with step-by-step instructions. So first, let's talk about what the external sharing feature is and what it's all about. In short, it allows you to share project progress with absolutely anyone. With external sharing, you can give read-only access to designated projects, which can be accessed using a link. This allows you to share project progress with people who aren't even on Salesforce. This is perfect in situations when you just need to bring an external stakeholder up to speed on how a particular project is going, sort of like a status update. The link will share the project in TaskRay's plan view. Keep in mind the link will only provide read-only access to the project. That means that it will not be possible to interact with or update the project or its tasks from that link. So the way this all works is that it uses force.com sites. This is a native Salesforce functionality that is intended for similar purposes. It essentially allows you to share certain parts of your org with external stakeholders. So in order to use the TaskRay sharing functionality, it is necessary to first configure force.com sites. Another thing to keep in mind is that one full TaskRay license is required to use for this feature. So let me elaborate a little bit on that. When you set up force.com sites, you also automatically configure what's called a public site user. The public site user is essentially any external stakeholder that accesses the force.com site. It is just there to allow access into the public site. So you would have one force.com site and one public site user, but you can have multiple external stakeholders that would access the site using that public user. And to access TaskRay data, this public site user would need a TaskRay license, but you only need one license, even if you're sharing multiple projects with multiple people. A few other things to keep in mind. So the first, as I mentioned earlier, the way this feature works is by generating a link for every project that you want to share. That means that you should take security into consideration. The link can be accessed by anyone if they have it. So please use this feature at your own discretion. So just take all of that into consideration before you share links on your project. And another thing, if you're sharing a project, but you have sensitive data on that project that you don't want the external stakeholder to see, such as maybe a budget field or some sensitive information like notes, you would need to configure field level security for the public site. Even if you already have some field level security settings, the public site will not take those into consideration by default, so you would need to configure all of that separately. All right, so To set this feature up, there are 6 high-level steps, and they first go through setting up the Force.com site and then actually giving access to TaskRay using the Force.com site. So I will go into detail on each one of them and actually show you how to do it all in Salesforce. Just a reminder, all of these instructions are also on our support site, so you can always check in there to get all the step-by-step instructions. All right, so the first step is to register the domain for the public site. And to do this, so I have this Salesforce org, and to do this, you would go to Setup, and you would search for sites. If this is the first time that you've accessed this page, you would have to deploy your domain, but this step might not apply to you if you've already deployed your domain. So this is a one-time thing for all public sites within Salesforce. So let's call this TR sharing webinar as my domain. So you would check this and you would register your domain. And that is the first big step of setting up this feature. So that's part 1 that is done. And these are the instructions for it. So then you would move on to step 2, and that is actually creating the site to share projects. So I'm going to jump back into Salesforce, and I'm going to click New under Sites right here. And it will take me to this page to enter all of the site information. Let me pull up my deck. So for the site label, I will enter TaskRay external sharing. Site contact, you can change this, but it defaults to the user that is setting it up. And default web address, we advise to enter some value in here so that you have a designated site for your TaskRay project. So I'm going to enter project status as my default web address. The next important step here is active site homepage. So you would click on the lookup icon right here, and you would need to find TR task board. Select it right here, and that is essentially saying what you want to show on your public site. You would also need to make the site active. You can do this right here, or once you fill out all the information and save it, you can activate it on the next page. I'm just going to do that right here. And then the rest, just make sure to check all of these checkboxes. They're usually checked by default, but just double check that they are checked. And click Save. That should create our new public site. Right, so that's step 2, that's done. And then the next step is to assign a TaskRay license to the public site user. So like I said earlier, you need 1 TaskRay license to assign to the public user. However, if you are testing it out and you're currently on the TaskRay trial, you would be able to skip this step because you would have a site license and that would apply to the public site user. However, once the trial is over, you would need to assign that license if you continue to use this feature. In this org, I am currently on a trial, so I also don't need to do this step, but it would be on this page, on your TaskRay external sharing page, you would click Public Access Settings, and that would pull up your external sharing user profile. And here is where you can see all of the information about that profile. and you can click to view users, and that's where your external user will be. And to assign the license, it would be in this Manage Packages section. Next to TaskRay, there would be a checkbox, and you would be able to click Assign Licenses, and that's how you would assign your one TaskRay license. The next step is to assign the permission set to the external user. This is to actually show all the data to this external user. And for that, you would go to that external site guest user page, and under permission set assignments, you would click on Edit Assignments, and you would select the TaskRay external read-only access permission set. So you'd save that, and now this external user has the TaskRay external read-only access permission set. That means they would be able to see TaskRay data. All right, the next step is to fill out TaskRay global settings to allow sharing projects. And for that, we would need the public site user ID as well as the public site URL, so the link to the public site that you've set up. To get the user ID, so I'm on the external site guest user, and actually I'll open up a second setup window so that it's easier to copy and paste. So I'm in setup. To get to TaskRay global settings, just search for custom settings. And next to TaskRay global settings, click manage and then edit. To make this feature active, you would just need to populate two fields, which are TaskRay public site URL and TaskRay public site user ID. All right, so TaskRay public site user ID, let's start with that one. So I'm on my site guest user page, and to get the user ID, that is actually in the URL, and this is the user ID. And on our support site, it talks about how to get this user ID very specifically because it can be a little bit tricky to find it in the URL. But if you switch to Classic, it might be a little bit easier to see that user ID from there. So there is the user ID and then public site URL. For that, we would return to sites. And here is our external sharing website, and this is the URL. If you just select it, it won't copy the full address. So what you would need to do is right-click it and select copy link address. If you're using a different browser, it'll say something slightly different, but you would right-click and select an option that is kind of like copy link address. But this is in Chrome, and that's the option that you would see if you're using Chrome. So we copied our public site URL and then paste it in there. And so now we have our public site populated as well as the user ID. So save changes. All right. Oh, one thing that I actually skipped doing right here, but one thing that you would need to do is when you paste the public site URL, make sure that the HTTP has an S at the end, so that is a secure connection. So if it's not there, just enter it on your keyboard and then save your changes. Right, so that step is done, and then now, so this talks about entering all the information into TaskRay global settings. So now what you would need is to update your project modal so you can use it to share designated projects. And for that, you would need to add two fields to your projects and tasks, just projects, sorry. And actually, this functionality is only available in Classic, so let's switch over to Classic to add those two fields to the project. So I'm going to search for objects. And right here, TaskRay project. And under field sets, you will click on TaskRay project field sets. So field sets are not available to manage in Lightning, which is why we switched over to Classic. And we would need the available for external sharing field. So you would just drag it down into this box. And we need the external sharing link field added to the field set as well. So once you drag those down, click Save. And now that part is done. So now those fields will appear on the project within TaskRay. So that's all the configuration that you need to do to start using this feature. And let's actually test it out really quickly. I'm going to switch back to Lightning. And open up TaskRay. And right here, I have my customer onboarding project already set up. So I would open up project details, and I can see my two new fields right here available for external sharing and external sharing link. So click Edit. And to make this project available for external sharing, you would just need to check this checkbox and click Save. That will generate this link right here, which is the link that you would be able to share with that external stakeholder that needs to check on project progress. So I'm clicking on that, and if that person were to click on that link, this is what they would see. So it's TaskRay Plan View, one of the TaskRay views, and it's this customer onboarding project, and it's read-only information. So they can see all of the tasks, task groups, colors of the bars, which show what status the tasks are in, and that all of that information will be available. However, that person would not be able to, let's say, drag and drop a task to update its date or complete any information in here. This is just to check up on progress, and it's only in read only. So there is no interactive aspect to it. Another thing that that person would be able to see is the info tab, which shows a snapshot of how the project is going, milestones, any tasks at risk, how tasks are distributed across team members, as well as they would be able to generate charts using the tasks that are visible on the board right here. So that is external sharing. So that's how you would use this feature. And once you would need to close down the access to that public site, you would just uncheck this checkbox. That link would disappear from this field. And also, if that person were to try to access that URL again, it would just give them an error that they need to be authorized to see that page. So that's a way of how you can control whether or not a project is available for sharing. All right, so that's that feature overall. There are a couple of optional steps that you could do, and one of them is to configure field level security. Like I mentioned earlier, that is done in a separate place within Salesforce. So you would go back to the sites page and open the public sharing profile and configure which objects or fields you want the person have access to. We also provide a validation rule, and that validation rule allows you to lock down who can share projects. So the validation rule will restrict it to project owner. So that means that only the project owner would be able to check that available for external sharing checkbox to make that project available. By default, anyone can do it, but you can activate this validation rule if you want an extra level of security around that. All right, so finally, since we've released this feature, we've already gotten some questions about it, and I just gathered some frequently asked questions right here that we would like to answer. So the first question is it possible to access any of the other TaskRay views using the external sharing link? So by default, like I showed you, only plan view is available, and that is actually the only view that you can use, that the link will give access to on the project. So it's just for plan view, none of the other TaskRay views. The next question is it possible to view more than one project on the external sharing link? So the answer to that question is also no. Only one project can be viewed on the external sharing link at a time. However, if you do need to share multiple projects, you would just simply go into all of those project details, check that box, and that would generate different links for each one of those. So you wouldn't need to set up a new site, you wouldn't need another TaskRay license. You would just generate different links for each one of those projects. And security, this is really important aspect. So can anyone with the link access it? And the answer to that is yes. So once again, make sure that you share your links with the people that you trust. Because if once someone has that link, they would be able to access it until you lock that down, until you turn off the external sharing for a specific project. So just something to keep in mind. And that's all that we had for you today. Thank you so much for joining us. Let us know if you have any questions. We're always happy to help you out at support@bracketlabs.com. Thank you.